Welcome to How to Write Good. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. You can find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. You can find my book on there, The Ninth Hour. You can find my podcast on there, my serialized novel on there as well. So it's another book, I guess you could call it. It's called One Last Toast for Ebenezer Fleet. But if you want to bypass my website and go through another way, because my website's the central hub, so I mean it's easier, right? If you want to just go straight to the source for those things, you can find my book on Amazon. I think it's best to just type in my name, or you can type in The Ninth Hour. It's blue. There you go. Or you can find my serialized novel either on my website. That's the only place you can find it in print, or you can find it on any podcast catching software, application. You got your applications, you young people. I'm fairly young myself. You can find it on any podcast app, and it'll show up. Or you can find it on this one, but I just like to have it in there just in case you don't want to hear my voice talk about random stuff. Our word of the week this week is anguish, and it comes from like the old French. So it's very similar. It's like causing grief or distress or torment. And it comes from, if you go far enough back, it comes from, actually I think that's French still, be troubled or distressed or feel agony. So there's actually there's the noun, and then there's the verb, and I haven't really seen anguish used as a verb, but in Old French, the noun meant a choking sensation or rage. It covered a choking sensation, distress, anxiety, rage. So some of those still fit into that category. I'm interested in the fact that it was a choking sensation. In Latin, angustia, tightness, narrowness. I think that's really interesting that it goes according to that choking idea. It goes back to figuratively be in distress, difficulty, to throttle, to torment. And it comes from I think it's a Latin root. No, it's a Proto-Indo-European root. Wow. A Proto-Indo-European root word. So this is a very old word, because Proto-Indo-European, for those of you who don't know, if you haven't heard probably 75% of my podcasts, Proto-Indo-European is the language that pretty much all the European languages come from, and Indian actually comes from as well. Indian as in India. So it comes from a Proto-Indo-European root word, ang, which means tight, painfully constricted, or painful, which I think is super interesting. So this word anguish has a very, very long history, which I think is really cool. And that Proto-Indo-European root, ang, or however you said, ang, I don't know how to say it, that almost sounds exactly like the beginning of the word, which I think is really cool. What you see with some of these words that are really old, like going back to that original language before it developed into all these smaller languages, what you see is that there's a lot of words that they are, I'm going to say one more thing on anguish after this, but there's a lot of these words that look very similar in all these Proto-Indo-European languages thousands of years later. And it's really interesting that anguish is one that kept its meaning, which it's just something it's interesting to think about, because people have been dealing with pain and suffering and throttling through the history of humanity. So you are not alone if you are having a bad day or you feel anguish. It has been the case forever. Not forever, but you know what I mean. So, I think it's really interesting that I love it when I run into words that are connected back to the Proto-Indo-European. You have things like, I think ox goes back to that, or man, I think woman, different things like that. Or house, I think is very similar through the ages, because of the fact that people have been living in houses forever. Or farm implements. You have stuff like farm implements that go back a really long ways, I believe. So we are going to go into the accidental lessons this week, and I don't know where I put my show map. So I'm going to try to do I lost it, and I don't really have time to find it again. But before we start that, I just want to, I know I thanked everyone, I think last week, who listens to this, and I just want to thank you again. And I want to ask a favor of you, if you're willing, because it certainly isn't the case that you have to do this. but with this podcast and with the stuff I'm putting out, I'm a very, I don't want to say, there's always time you can carve out for different things. And I definitely do take time to not go nuts, if that makes sense. So I'm not, every second of my life is not taken up by working. Because if every second of my life was taken up by working, I would go insane. I would legitimately go insane. I would probably be in an insane asylum. Like, not an asylum, they don't exist anymore. But I would probably be in a mental hospital if every second of my life was taken up by work. But I just want to ask you a favor as listeners. So if you are someone who finds value in this, which you might not, you might just listen to it because I'm an idiot, which is all right. Good for you. If you find value in this podcast, I'm just going to ask you, if you haven't already, because I know some people have, if you find value in this podcast, you've been a listener for a while, I'm just going to ask you that you go to either iTunes, go to iTunes, give it a review. You don't even have to write anything. You can just give it, based on what I think, the amount of stars I think. I am in the process, so I really don't make any money off of what I put out. And I'm in the process of trying to do it and trying to make some money from it. And the reason why I want to be able to do that is because I haven't had the time or the energy to step it up to the point where I want it to be. I want this podcast to be really, really good. I want to have content that is excellent, that people come to. They're like, wow, I really walked away with some really good stuff. And some of you may think that already. And but at the same time, I just think that I'm rushed for a lot of things. And unfortunately, well, it's not super unfortunate, but the world runs on money. You know, you have to have money to live. You have to have money to do things. If you can generate income in some other place, then you can free up some time in some other area to devote more to something you love. I do love doing this, and I am extremely grateful for everyone who listens, and I'm extremely grateful to the fact that I can do this, that technology has progressed, that my dad, my grandpa, great-grandparents, they would have never been able to do something like this in the same way. So yeah, that's it. If you would be able to just be able to go over and review it on iTunes. It takes about 5 minutes, and I'm extremely grateful for everybody who listens, and I just am really grateful for everybody who reviews my stuff, who wasn't asked to do it. I really appreciate that. So yeah, we're going to get into our accidental essence. I'm going to be talking about, because I have to do that, I'm going to be talking about ideas. Ideas are something in writing that I think people are mystified by. So let me back up a second. Creative ideas are something that I think people who are not creative, in quotes, I think that people who aren't labeled creative or don't see themselves as creative, they view creative ideas as something that's mystifying to them. And I think that my goal is always to try to get people to a point where I want everybody to take risks, especially in their creative work. I want everybody, if somebody wants to be a writer, I want somebody to take a risk in their writing. I want somebody to learn. I know sometimes I get into the more cynical, and I hope I'm generally positive. I try to be generally positive. Once in a while, I'll complain about something, and once in a while, I will criticize something. But I try to be positive, and one of my goals for this podcast was always to not have people so focused on all the little tiny details and free them up for the joy that is creating, specifically writing. And one thing that I think people get stuck on, and I run into a lot of people who I think it seems mystifying to them. It's a mystical thing. And coming up with ideas, that is. I think coming up with ideas for some people is mystifying and mystical. And there's a few different areas of the writing/creative world that are mystifying to people. One thing I've heard, how do you come up with so many ideas? I think a lot of writers just are like, yeah, they just come to me. And I think that's legit, you know, their mind, that's how their mind works. And it certainly happens to me as well. And I'm sure that if you're a creative person and you do a lot of creative work, you have ideas of what work you want to do and how you want to do it. And then there's the idea of how do you make that idea into something beautiful? Okay, beautiful is something that's worthwhile. I mean, beautiful or worthwhile, or something that is really hits home with people, something that really gets to the core of what is artistic or what is art. Okay, for example, if you are someone who's a photographer, some people might be like, yeah, but you do this photography thing, you just see the world differently, and you capture what you see. And someone who writes books, they're like, well, you could have 75 ideas a day, or you have 75 ideas a week. You have more than enough ideas, and you're never going to run out of ideas. And somebody who's a painter, there's probably the same thought process that goes into that. Another area that people seem to think is mystical is fitting all the pieces together. And I think that there are certainly, maybe I've talked about this in the past as well, but I just want to revisit if I have anyways. I think there's people who think are naturally more creative than others, and I've totally said that. I also think that you can learn. I think the human mind is extremely flexible. You call it plastic, right? That's what the word is. Plasticity is the ability of something to change, and specifically, we talk about the human brain and the ability of the human brain to change. The human mind is extremely plastic. There's a great deal of plasticity, and people can learn so much. People of all ages can learn so much. I can't remember who it was. If you listen to the podcast, I'm sorry I can't remember your name. I just saw a Instagram post, and somebody had, I don't know if it was a quote from somebody else or their own, but kudos to this person. They were saying that it doesn't matter when you start writing. It's not like being in an athletic field. It's not like dancing. It's not like all these other things. And you can start writing when you're 15 years old. You can start writing when you're 25, when you're 50, when you're 75 years old. And even if you start writing late, there's always, you're almost certainly going to add something of value to, if you're earnest about it, like if you're truthful and you're trying to be truthful. I'll make that caveat. Caveat. I don't know how to say the word caviar. But if you're trying to be truthful, I think that you're going to be adding something to that. The human dialogue, I don't know, the great conversation, that's like a philosophical thing. The great conversation of art that is good. So I think even if you're starting at 75, if you're 15, there's value in what you have to say, okay? I've met a lot of 15-year-olds or 12-year-olds, you're not very intelligent. You might be really smart you might be a really smart 15-year-old. You're really stupid, okay? And that's just how it is. You'll get smarter and you'll get better. And, that's just part of it. And you've got to take those chances. You've got to take risks. You've got to allow yourself to be stupid. So that's my goal. But with this idea of coming up with ideas, whatever, with coming up with ideas, people are mystified because when someone who is a creative comes up with ideas, they are doing it subconsciously. If you learn something, or there's certain things you do, there's a lot of stuff you do subconsciously. There's a lot of stuff you do without thinking. You can chew a gum and do a lot of different things. I could go through my whole entire day and chew gum. Well, you're still chewing the gum. You're not actively thinking about chewing the gum, and you're getting that done. I can type without thinking about where my hands go on the keyboard. And when I'm typing, I just think about what's coming out of my brain, what I want to type, and then I move my hands, of course, but it's not this active process. So with typing and chewing gum, I've learned, or maybe it's in the case of chewing gum, maybe it's not learning it, maybe it's just what is the word? Stupid. Maybe it's innate, right? That I can chew and do something else at the same time. But at the same time, your mind is allowing you to do more than one thing, okay? Because it puts one thing into the background. It's like running things on a computer. So like on a computer, you might have something in the forefront, and you have something running in the background, keeping everything going, keeping things running smoothly, etc. And that's what your brain does. So with people who are creative, I think it's the case that oftentimes they're like, yeah, I came up with this idea, and then when people ask them how they came up with that idea, they have no idea where it came from. And I think it used to be the case. It used to be the case, not I think it did. It used to be the case that I had the same attitude, that I had so many ideas and I didn't know where they came from. But I've, at the very least, I'm a student of studying myself and figuring out how I work. And I just wanted to explain how I think I became more creative, or how I developed this creativity. And I think that it's the case that everybody has. I don't know if I think there is. Everybody has a certain level of creativity, because creativity is lateral thinking. Creativity is if you're walking down a hall and somebody is in the middle of the hall, you're not going to continue to walk and run into them. You're going to turn sideways and go around them. Or if you are trying to, for example, if you're a bad student and you're not super smart and you're like, well, what am I going to do to pass this test? Well, cheating is a creative solution. It's a bad solution, but it's a creative solution to passing the test. So if you think, oh, I'm not creative at all, that's not true. It would take a very low IQ level for creativity not to be, for you to not have any creativity. I even think that people who have very low IQs, who are very low functioning, have creativity, because I've worked with people who are very low functioning, if we want to say it that way, and they find ways to get their way. And if someone is finding a way to get their way, they are getting around issues in their path. They're getting around that person in the middle of the hallway, right? For me, I think I developed creativity because I don't think I had this unbelievably horrible childhood, but I did always have this worrying, right? So I did always worry a lot. So in my life, I had to, so if you have pain, I think this happens with kids more than adults. If you have a lot of pain and you have to find a solution to get around that pain, so there's no option but to move forward, right? If you are, I think it goes back to the horror film Saw, and Saw, the people are stuck somewhere and they're going to, someone else is going to die, or they're going to die a horrible death. So they have to find a way to get around that horrible death. I have never seen Saw. I have no idea what's going on. So they have to do something really bad, like cut off their arm. You go back to stuff like, you go back to that movie with what's his face, where he gets stuck, his arm gets stuck, so they have to cut it off. He's a climber. Shoot, I'm sorry. When you go back to stuff like that, that was a true story, and then people had to figure out ways, creative ways to survive. Because he's like, if I don't do this, I'm going to die. And you go back to so many places in the history of the world, and people have shown vast storehouses of innovation within their own lives in small ways. They figured out ways to survive, right? And the more times you're running into something where it's like, hey, I have to move forward, otherwise I'm going to die, or you don't have another option. So it's like, you know what? I've got to find a way to get food. You're going to find a way to get food. So in my own life, I dealt with a pain point, and I knew that I had to figure out a way to get around that pain point. So I figured out a way to get around it, and I think that being creative and daydreaming and different things like that were allowing me to do that. Now, I think it's the case that in a lot of creative people, and I think it depends on this area of creativity, but I think that it's the case with a lot of creative people that there are pain points, and they want to avoid them, so they find a way to avoid them as children. And what happens in their minds is that they develop this habit of, it's not avoidance anymore, it's this creative habit, okay? And so I think that's why these people are able to come up with these ideas, because they've been practicing. They've been practicing going over these ideas again and again and again. Now the question with that, the thing I run into in my own life is when I see somebody really good at something, I'm like, well, yeah, they've had 15 years to learn how to do it, right? And I don't think about the fact that I could start right now, and in 15 years, I would be just as good as they are right now, maybe even better. It could be the case that I'm even better. But I don't think about that. I usually think enviously, oh, these people, they've had 10 years to practice this, or somebody started them out in life as kids, and that's why they're so much farther than I am. Or I don't know if it would be further or farther in that case. But I think that's bad thinking, and I think it's better to think, oh, it took them 15 years. If I start right now in this amount of time, I might be where they are, I might be behind, I might be ahead of them. But it certainly isn't the case that one of the worst things you can do in your life is look at other people and be envious of them. It's going to make you miserable. I've never had an experience in my life where I look at another person and I'm like, oh, they've got it go so good and I have it so bad, where I'm not miserable. Every single case is where I am miserable. So it's a bad way to live your life. If you look at other people and you're happy for them, you become happier. And I'm not a happy person, generally. I'm not this really, really happy person. I like people a lot. I like the world a lot. I like things. Like, I like life. But I'm not super happy. But at the same time, when I do look at other people and I think, oh yeah, I'm really grateful for them. I'm actually happy for my friends, happy for my family. I'm happier myself. It improves. So you might be thinking, oh, well, you've had since childhood to develop your creativity. Because if creativity is the avoidance of something and it's finding ways around something, and there's that creative muscle that you've been flexing your whole entire life, well, you've been doing that for however many years, over 20 years if it's your whole entire life, right? At least 10 years, whatever. You've been doing it so long, how am I going to ever get there? Or how do I even start? Because that's what I run into a lot. And I probably fall into this error. I don't think it's an error, but I probably fall into this way of talking a lot, where I'm talking above the level of a lot of people. And I guess if you don't like it and you don't find my stuff useful, that's fine. But I want to bring this down to what you can do, because I want to be able to reach. I'm trying to reach people who are a little lower in the. They haven't been around writing as long, or they just are mystified by how to start or what to do. That's why I put out my rules, because at the very least, if you don't know what to do, just talk it out and write it down, right? But if you... Oh, sorry, I'm looking at my time limit, and I'm like, wait, 40 minutes? But it's not. It's just 40 seconds. If you want to develop creativity, if you're in a writing... Let's think about it from a writing perspective. If you want to develop your ability to come up with ideas for writing... specifically the premises of stories. Let's talk about that, because I think that's where people get hung up on. But really, it extends to the rest of writing as well. If you want to come up with ideas for stories, like this story is this. This is a cowboy who goes to space. Which sounds really stupid, but I think it'd be so much fun. If you had a Western that this cowboy ended up being on a different planet, but he was really from the 1800s and stuff like that. That'd just be a fun story. So if you want to write it, I'll read it. You can take it. I don't care. What was I going to say? Okay, so you have to practice thinking this way if you don't have it as a habit already. If you don't know how to do something, you have to practice doing that thing. If you don't think in a specific way, you have to practice thinking in that specific way. So for someone who naturally comes up with ideas, they're already doing this, but they're doing it without thinking. They're not doing it consciously. They're doing it subconsciously. For you, you're going to have to think about it consciously, and you're going to have to develop the habit. If you want to play piano, and I've tried to play piano, and I want to learn how to play piano, you've got to practice playing piano. And I think it's the case that if you want to play piano at any age, you can learn how to play piano at any age. You have to be willing to practice. There's something called, there's muscle memory that goes into playing piano. There is brain muscle. It's not brain muscle. I'm just making stuff up right now. But when you are learning something, that if you are trying to learn how to think in a specific way, you need to practice thinking in that specific way. This applies to a lot of different things. If you want to be happier in your life, you have to be intentional about seeing positive things in your life that are going to make you happier. There's certain personalities, right? There's certain things in your mind. There's certain ways your brain works that are very hard to go against. Okay, so if you're someone who is more melancholy, you have a sadder personality, it's going to be harder to go against that. If you want to be happier, I think you should fight like crazy to be happier. If you want to be more ambitious, I think you should fight like crazy to be more ambitious. This goes into everything. If you think, oh man, I worked for 6 hours today and I'm already beat and I just don't know how I'm going to make myself work any harder. If you feel like a lazy bum, guess what? Why don't you practice not being a lazy bum, right? If you look at yourself, you're like, you know what? Like, I want to do all these things in my life. I have all these ideas, but I get to this point where I just don't have the motivation. Practice being motivated. And I think you're going to end up in 5 years where you're like, I practiced, I just got up and I did it and I got going and I made it make it a positive experience, and then you are able to do it. The same thing applies to finding ideas for creativity, because what ideas are that you come up with that you base stories off of. And I think these ideas extend to music. I think it extends to art. I think it extends to photography as well. Is people are out in the world, they take in information, right? They process that information, and people who are creative, we put that label of creativity on them, they take in that information, they see a little thing that is cool, right? They're looking at this cool aspect of reality. They're looking at this aspect of reality that piques their interest. And in some cases, they say, oh, that's connected to this, and this is connected to this, and that's a story idea. They connect things differently, right? They connect two things together. They're like, oh, that's really interesting. I really like that. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to keep that idea, keep a notebook. And the more they do that, this even happens in my life. If I do not keep up the habit of slowing down and looking around and allowing myself to just daydream. If I don't keep up the habit of daydreaming, I don't daydream as much. But daydreaming has been a very useful thing throughout my life for processing through bad times, hard times, things that I don't want to deal with. But daydreaming has also been very, very good with coming up with ideas. But for you, and even for me, even when I start out, I'm going to have to look at something. And I'm going to have to be like, hey, let's daydream about this specific thing. Instead of trying to just let our minds wander all around. So it's directed daydreaming. You have to essentially direct your daydreaming. And what you're going to do is you're going to maybe you're going to be like, wow, I really like that. You can do it with anything. You could say, oh man, I really like that vehicle. Okay. So you're going to just daydream about that vehicle. Maybe allow that emotion to come up and fill you, and allow your mind to just wander around about that vehicle and why you like it, and what's the reason behind why you like it. And it might be other things. I think things that are mysterious are the best things to do. For example, if you run into something in nature, you could be like, oh man, that's a really cool tree. And then this happens to me. It's like, wow, that tree just kind of piques my interest. That does something in me. That elicits an emotional response. And I'm like, wow, why does that elicit an emotional response? Well, it oftentimes connects me to something that is within, that could be within a story, right? So if you want to write stories, maybe you find something that piques your interest and you're like, wow, how would that connect into a story? How could I bring that idea into a story? Some of those won't be good story premises. Some of those will be just details. Some of those will be excellent ideas for stories. But if you're someone who doesn't do it naturally, just take some time, do it every single day, and the human mind has the ability to change. The human mind has the ability to adapt. If you practice the piano every single day and you are intentional about how you practice, and you are strategic, I think you do have to be strategic about how you practice the piano, then you can develop the ability to play music. Okay? If you want to come up with story ideas, take some time where you actually come up with story ideas. It could be when you're on a walk. It could be the case that you just have a piece of paper out in front of you, and you are just letting your mind think about, oh, what's this story idea? What's that story idea? Maybe it's the case that you have to take a little different tack. Maybe you have to do it a little differently. Maybe you're the person who just has to come up with all the story ideas, right? You have all the ideas, you have 1,000 ideas, and then you have one that's good. Because not every one of them is good. Well, I'll have a caveat on that too. But yeah, so you come up with all these ideas, and then you're like, wow, this is the one that really fits. This is the one that really I want to work on, because this one is really going to be impactful on people. Really, really, really. Just the caveat on caveat. I don't know how to say the word. I'm really sorry. So the caveat on that is that pretty much I think you can take any premise of a story and you can use it and you can write it in a way that is good. For example, The Old Man and the Sea. Some people don't like Ernest Hemingway. That's all right. The Old Man and the Sea. Oh, old guy goes out to fish for a big fish. Right? He struggles against the fish. It's not a very big book. I like the book. A lot of people like the book. That's why it's a classic. There's other books too. There's some that are more. There are some premises, whatever, that are more interesting than others. Some of them are like, oh, that's really interesting. But Lord of the Rings, A little short man goes and needs to throw a ring of power into the fire. And you have all this stuff swirling around that one premise. So you could have something you can take so many things. You've got to, when you're writing a story, because so many people, I think, they separate, they think the writing itself, and it is to a certain degree, but I'll have to split this up. They think the writing itself is the story. Okay. What I mean by that is people focus so much on the craft of writing. And as I've said in the past, there's a point where you reach a threshold, and it doesn't matter if you're unbelievably good at writing. There's a threshold for writing where people are not going to notice that you're this amazing writer or somebody isn't. Okay? Most people aren't obsessed with writing. Realize that. Most people are just go about their lives. Most people are like, yeah, I liked the book I read, but I'm not obsessed with writing. They're not saying, oh, this is really great writing, this isn't really bad writing. There's a time and place to look at writing and just get immersed in the craft of writing. And there is a time and place, and I think it's just as important. If you are focused on the story and you want to write great stories, it might be the case that it's more important, but I don't want to just outright say it is because I'm not sure. I really don't know. If you want to write a great story, you have to be immersed in the story as well. You have to fall in love with this idea of the story. That means when you think about something, think about how being in romantic love works. Being in romantic love, how it works is that you like someone, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whatever, right? And if you have that infatuation, that's specifically what I'm talking about, that person's on your mind all the time. That person makes you feel completely different. That person makes you feel like you could run through a wall. I don't know, jump off a cliff. Not jump off a cliff. Don't jump off a cliff. That person makes you feel like you could do anything. It's just like, it doesn't matter. This person likes me. This person, we're in a relationship, and I love it. It's the best thing in the world. It's so exciting. I just want to run away with them, honestly, right? I think that's something that is pretty much every single human has that feeling. Almost every single human. But if you're in romantic love, even if you don't, that love isn't reciprocated. Did I say that right? Even if they don't love you back, you still have that feeling around them, right? Whoops. And even if you don't love them back, you're like, man, they're always on my mind, and I've just got so much stuff, and I'm fantasizing about, oh, we're gonna get married, we're gonna have 17 children, and etc. We're gonna go and we're gonna just live wherever. It doesn't even matter. We can just travel the world. We can do whatever because you're in love, and it doesn't matter. All of the barriers are broken. And I think that creativity is like that. And I think that writing, I think creativity in general is like that. I think that you have to just love the story. If you're a painter, you have to love that process. You have to allow yourself to love that process. You have to be like, and it's not the same thing, of course, as romantic love, but it is a good analog to romantic love in a way, because you're just slowing down. You're saying, man, I find such pleasure in painting. I find such pleasure in putting together a story, not writing the story. That is different. I find so much pleasure in just coming up with ideas for the story. I find so much pleasure in taking photographs. I find so much pleasure in making music, right? And you have to actually allow yourself to have fun with it. That's the thing. You go back, and it's not the same thing as just having fun. It's not this mind-numbing internet fun. It's not this mind-numbing fun you have with television either. It's more like when you see a television show, a TV show, a television show. I'm from the 50s. It's more like when you see a TV show and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You pick up your favorite book and you're like, I love this so much. This is my favorite thing ever. You gotta allow yourself to feel that toward the act of creativity that you're doing. And I think it's going to be really helpful, because what happens, you gear yourself, you put yourself into the mindset of that creativity. And when you put yourself into that mindset, when you look at other things around you, it starts to connect back to that creativity. And maybe this will help people more than anything else. You practice that mindset but you practice connecting things to that mindset. If you put yourself into that mindset, suddenly things are going to open up. Suddenly things are going to start, you're going to start to see things that are going to connect back to that because you've just allowed yourself to enjoy it so much. It's a good thing. Creativity is a good thing. People twist it sometimes, but creativity at its core, I think it's a good thing. Art at its core is a good thing. If you're a musician, music at its core is a good thing. These are beautiful things in the world. These are things that are the pinnacle of who we are as humans, I think. And I think that you just need to realize that. And you need to be like, you know what? It doesn't matter if I make something awesome. It doesn't matter if I make something that is terrible. I'm going to allow myself to enjoy this creative process. And I think that you're going to end up with something. Let's go back a little bit. So I think you're going to end up with something good, or it's going to allow you to help you get there. But when you're enjoying that creative process, I think that creative process, then you need to kind of do a turnabout, and you need to connect. I think that creative process, whatever it is, if it's writing, if it's storytelling, whatever it is, I think it always loops back to reality. I think that creative process always loops back to reality. And I think when that creative process loops back to reality and you develop that habit of thinking that way, you're able to see ideas that other people aren't. The ideas are already there. The reason why ideas are already there is because people are already coming up with these ideas. I do not think that they come up out of the blue. I don't think they're things. Sometimes, Frankenstein, with Frankenstein, the book was written off of a dream, I guess. And there's been a few books that have been written off of dreams, but the majority of them are just people coming up with ideas. The books I'm writing are based off of, they started with Shakespeare. They started with his simplicity. I took a really simple premise, that's it. And I think you can do that too, and I think that you just need to, if you don't do it naturally, practice. Allow yourself time. Maybe it's time to like disconnect from media because it's getting in the way, and maybe that's gonna do it. I don't know. And you've got to experiment to find your niche and how to do it. So I'm not saying that there is this perfect way of doing this. There's so many people. Maybe it's listening to music. Maybe it is watching a show that you love. You watch an episode. Maybe you have this favorite show, and it's this really creative show. It just pulls you, and it just makes you feel more alive. Because that's the goal. I think that's what we're trying to reach for. When you're in love with somebody, you're trying to reach for being more alive. When you're creating something, you're trying to reach for being more alive. A lot of people, I think, who are creatives, they have issues. They're trying to reach for something to be more alive. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to get across. I hope this is useful. I know I was trying to say that I wanted to make it accessible. I hope I have. It's something really hard to do because it's dealing with the thoughts of people, and the formation of thoughts are very difficult to tease out. I don't think we can get to the groundwork for the formation of thoughts. So when you talk about it, it's difficult. But honestly, it isn't fun. I mean, it isn't just fun. It certainly is a fun thing, but it goes beyond fun. Creativity goes beyond fun. That being swept up in something creative goes beyond fun. If you do some form of crafty type creative thing, you do calligraphy, you do basket weaving, it goes back to kind of the Zen idea. So instead of and it's focus. That's what Zen really is, or what I'm talking about. So it goes back to that focus on what you're doing, where you're just enjoying if you're making a basket, or you're throwing a cup, ceramic cup on a wheel, it's clay. You aren't experiencing it in the same way, but you are experiencing it, I think. And how you're experiencing it, I think you are, you enjoy the tactile feeling of making that thing. If you're doing calligraphy, it's how the strokes of each letter feel. And you just understand, you just enjoy that, even if it's not the best or whatever. With creating pottery, you're enjoying that you're connected to that piece of clay and you're making it into something. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support me more, what I would ask you to do is that you go to iTunes and you leave a 5-star review. That is something that really, really helps me and helps push the podcast out to different people. And it's something that doesn't cost you much time at all. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate everyone who listens to this podcast. If you ever listen to this podcast and you have questions or you have topics you would like me to cover, you can send those to me and I'll look them over and I'll see which ones I think I can cover intelligently. And if you just want to reach out for anything at all, you can do that as well. Thanks for your time. My name is Daniel Poppy, and as always, this is How to Write Good.